statistics and your presentation, you talked about those with type A blood suffering the worst from COVID-19. And I'm wondering, what's the correlation with blood type? Because there are some other health correlations with differences in blood type. And do you find perhaps that their blood types appear most frequently in certain ethnic groups?
Yeah, so this is, again, really new data. And one of the things that we've learned so far with new data, particularly with that retraction of that big hydroxychloroquine study, is on the one hand, we really need to get information out as fast as we can. On the other hand, in the process of doing so, researchers are very nervous about drawing conclusion too early. And so I just want to be cautious about what I'm saying. But the particular study that they did looked at, the people who had COVID and graded them in terms of this disease severity that they had, and then looked at their genetic profile to find out whether there's any correlation. There's a very big statistical thing that they do, and because they're looking at millions of genetic loci in the genomes, and they found two. And so the question in number one for us is always, is that just accidental that they found it, or is this real? And so generally speaking, before I draw any significant conclusion, we like to see other studies to confirm it. But they did find very specifically that there is an association between the blood type gene area and severity of the disease. What that means right now, I don't know. What that means for racial and ethnic disparities, I don't know, to be frank. I would hate to say, well, this racial group has a higher propensity of this particular blood type, and that's why they're having this problem. The analysis is not there for that yet. So let's just say right now there is one particular risk factor is the blood type, and racial is another blood type. Another risk factor, and let's see how they cross when we do further analysis.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. And we're going to move on to Professor Jody R. Moore. He's a professor of law at the University of Southern California and an author. He will comment on his words, the generational upheaval that we are seeing, and what are the reforms that this country needs to undertake to start addressing the moment and the future. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I'd like to connect my remarks to those that went just before me by the doctor. I connect that to law enforcement reform in this moment that's been precipitated by brutal law misconduct in relation to another Black person. I started writing about this area, my first book was in 1997. It was entitled Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, The Hidden Cost of Being Black in America. And it was really about every one of the issues we're talking about today. So it seems nothing's changed but what year it is. It seems that when we were going through these marches in 2013, 14, 15, Black Lives Matter movement, there was a wash, rinse, repeat cycle that you could anticipate that we were always going to go through. It was going to be, first, let's convene a commission. Then let's hold some public hearings. Then let's have some people vent about their frustration and anger. And then we're going to have a few policy folks say, well, I know, here's some interventions that are going to prevent this from happening again. And they're going to come up with some interventions like body cams. Someone's going to say there's going to be another set of hashtags. That isn't going to solve it. Someone's going to say, what about implicit bias training? More hashtags. Somebody's going to say, well, what about de-escalation training? More hashtags. And someone's going to say, well, what about community policing? And here we are looking at a moment in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there the police department had all those interventions. They were one of the early departments to start implementing all those interventions, and it didn't solve the problem. In fact, as was pointed out going in, you had not only the officer who actually had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, but the three others who just stood by. So I think we're coming to the realization that those interventions are, there's not a technological fix. There's not a way to tweak policy and fix this problem, that it really requires some deeper analysis. And that deeper analysis has to do with structural racism, to be sure. You know, the only way we're going to avoid having to go through this discussion again and again is start to address those structural racism issues. But beyond just structural racism, it also has to do with our hearts and minds and our lack of care and concern, empathy for Black lives. Black lives just don't matter is the bottom line here. Black lives haven't mattered since the inception of this nation. A lot of the, as you know, founders were celebrating liberty and democracy and owning slaves. Then we had a cataclysmic race war, 600,000 dead Americans, and we went into Jim Crow. Black lives didn't matter under Jim Crow as much as non-Black lives. And now we're looking at, if you walk down Los Angeles, where I am, you go into Skid Row, you walk down the street in Skid Row, which is probably the fiercest expression of structural violence in America, the largest homelessness encampment in America. You know, families, everyone, all kinds of folks living there together. 75% of the faces are Black. And I just had to do that number. That's in Down, Out, and Under Arrest, Forrest Stewart's book. You know, 75%, you go into prisons and jails, and the demographics look roughly the same, right? And COVID-19, of course, is disproportionately hitting the Black community. So what's the fix? What's the better solution? I know, you know, as I said, hearts and minds. I think the trope for our problem is Hurricane Katrina and what you saw in the Ninth Ward with those Blacks standing with water up to their necks. And one day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by, 4 days go by. Sean Penn is rowing out up there, handing out fresh water because FEMA still couldn't get its act together. There was not a panic of empathy collectively for those Black lives. When those planes ran into those buildings in New York, though, in 9/11, there was a panic of empathy, and we just helped. We just got it done. Nothing kept us from offering relief to those victims. Right, and so I've done. I have a book coming out on August 18th, in which I do a lot of research and psychological studies that point out we have an in-group empathy bias that makes us not feel the same level of care and concern for out-group members as in-group members. You know, and it happens at the level of the mirror neurons, on a neuronal level. It's not even conscious a lot of times. But the bottom line is, we have relative indifference to the suffering of those who don't belong to our in-group. Now, how does that play out in terms of this police situation in which we find ourselves? Well, the solution isn't the technological ones we've learned, I think, or the policy tweaks. We have to cut back on the police department. That activists have been saying that for some time now, last several years, and now this is really bringing it home. We need to make deep slashes in the budgets of police departments and reallocate those resources to the things that the doctor before me was talking about. Address homelessness or houselessness is my preferred way of talking about it. Address healthcare, address education, address income disparities, right? We can do a lot of things if we have the resources to do them, but right now those resources are being sucked up by our law enforcement departments, right? Here in LA, we have about a $5.5 billion annual budget we're looking at coming out in the coming year. Nearly 54% of that, 53 point something percent of that in the mayor's budget was to go to LAPD, right? And you have those kind of staggering numbers around the country. Now, you know, you take that money out of those police departments, reallocate it, divert it to the kinds of problems we're talking about, and we can have a lot better health outcomes. We can address the unemployment issue, and we can have a lot less violence against Black folk generally, because the violence is often driven by the enforcement of low-level nonviolent offenses. George Floyd is dead today for passing allegedly a counterfeit $20 bill. Low-level nonviolent offenses. When they cut down on the enforcement of stop and frisk in New York, which is why you need a lot of times these police personnel, the crime rate didn't go up, it went down. When police decided they were going to have a work stop slow down in 2014, 2015 after after Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe," and there were marches, and they was upset, and they had a conflict with de Blasio. They had to work kind of slow down for several months, right? The crime rate didn't spike, didn't go up. It actually went down a little because they weren't doing so much proactive broken windows policing. So you can reduce the police presence without reducing our public safety. And then you can have the police, and I'll wind up with this, you can have the police, once you divert their funding from, kind of broken windows policing, you reduce their size, you have those funds go to other social services, social workers, that sort of thing. Then you can focus the police's attention on what it really should be focused on, and that's solving murders, rapes, violent assaults, robberies. In a lot of cities, those are only being solved at a 40-45% rate. And that's because the police resources are being diverted from investigation and good police work like that and going toward broken windows policing. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Armour. And we're going to go quickly to a question. Alentashar newspaper, can you ask the question part?
We're going to see all the time. This racism is not going to stop until we have to find a leader from the whole community to be united and face all this racism that we've been facing.
You came back.
Okay, yeah, one of the things we've been doing a lot is pointing a pious finger at protesters and telling them that don't waste all this time protesting, and especially don't think about violent protesting. What you should be doing is voting. Just vote. Well, Minneapolis had a Democratic mayor, Minnesota Democratic governor. Everybody in the political structure is Democrat. 13 Democratic city council people, and the other one was from the Green Party. De Blasio is Democratic out here in LA. So the vote isn't the answer by itself. We'd like to think that, that's our go-to. What we need is just deep cuts in the police department. We know what the fixes are now. We need the will, and we as the people got to get behind it to say we need changes at a fundamental level and how we are funding and what our budget looks like and what our budget priorities are.
Hi, Dr. Armour. I was wondering if you could address the issue of education and how that plays into structural racism, particularly education of African Americans themselves, who have for many years been left out of formal education.
Oh yeah, we have crumbling schools, and we put law enforcement officers in the schools to prime the school to prison pipeline. We start to criminalize what used to be just something you go down to the vice principal's office about. Now you're looking at juvenile hall about it. So it's aggravated a lot of those kinds of problems. And again, we need to take funding, 54% of $5.5 billion here in LA going to LAPD. That money should be going to schools, right? So we need to fundamentally rethink policing so that we can start to address those kinds of points that you're bringing up. Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor. We have more questions, so we'll take them at the end.